Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Today's show comes with a disclaimer. On today's show, when anybody says Merck in any context during this episode, it will always be referring to Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you not one, but two really awesome guests today involved in creating a better tomorrow. First, we have today the honor of being joined by Dr. Emre Ozcan, who leads the global digital health agenda and team of Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany, where he brings over 15 years of experience in biopharma, in medtech, in healthcare consulting, with experience across a range of disciplines, including strategy, research, marketing, and operations in several therapeutic areas. And in this current role, he holds accountability for the design and end-to-end delivery of digital health solutions to ultimately support Merck KGaA's franchise strategies, shape the architecture of their offerings, as they say, around the drug, including involvements in both devices and diagnostics. Prior to joining Merck, Dr. Ozcan was a junior partner at the Boston Consulting Group. He holds a bachelor's degree from Yale, his master's and PhD from Oxford. We also are honored to be joined by Walid Mehanna, who is Group Data Officer and Senior Vice President at Merck KGaA, where he has responsibility broadly for driving data and analytics strategy in the organization, implementation, architectures, governance, and culture across all its businesses. Previously, he served as Mercedes-Benz Car's first Chief Data Officer, and prior to joining Mercedes, spent over a decade at Horváth, serving as a consultant on a variety of areas, including business intelligence and big data. And he has over 25 years of experience in technology, as well as consulting for major corporations, and really enjoys this intersection of business and technology in a range of domains. It's going to be a fun show, a lot of interesting topics to get into. Dr. Emre Ozcan Walid Mehanna, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you, Raj. Great to be here.
It's great having both of you. I would love to start off as we typically do, and I think we'll go to Emre first and then to Walid. Emre, I just like to hear for a couple of minutes about your path, because you've been on a really interesting one. You started off studying political science, you moved into healthcare consulting about 15 years ago, ended up at Big Pharma. Talk a little bit about the journey and sort of introduce yourself to our audience, if you would.
Thank you, Rob, for the opportunity. I think we're a lot shaped by our childhood and context than we sometimes admit. I grew up in rural parts of Turkey with some deep divisions when it comes to ethnicity, religious conflicts, socioeconomic gaps. And I've been always driven by puzzle type of question. What explains one group to thrive, another group not to thrive? What explains peace in certain groups, among certain groups, and war among others? And it sometimes happens in one neighborhood, another neighborhood you go, and then the dynamics could be very different. I mean, that kind of puzzle thinking, trying to understand things, make sense of it, and then try to drive some lessons and normative guidelines about it is what's kept me going during my studies, which led to a PhD. And from that world, I took a lot of lessons learned around how do you explain things conceptually. How do you then ask the practical questions around so what? And then drive also the right normative guidelines of what is that we should be doing differently based on those lessons learned. After PhD, I realized that where I would like to make a difference is in the field of business and leveraging my background. And I joined BCG primarily, again, to chase the right questions, to chase the right puzzles to solve, and also was attracted by that learning journey that management consultancy brought, harnessing various different backgrounds and then diversity element. And then the point came about where I can go next with it, trying to again chase the puzzles, change the mission. And I realized, especially biopharma within the healthcare, is lending itself to various disruptions, various different future orientation about how to do things differently. So that's the point where it's as I did that transition. So in a way, I never had a master plan in my mind. I never had that fascination to excel in one topic and try to, for me, the mission was always go after a puzzle, look for connecting the dots and trying to tease out the so what around it. And now what within the biopharma industry, what really attracted me was the data and the digital questions around it. We're dealing with a lot of complexity, right? A lot of connecting the dots. So in that regard, my journey, I believe, prepared me to deal with that complexity, especially from a non-expert perspective. The second around teasing out the so what of it. I think in the data and the digital, we have at an inflection point of looking at various innovations and trying to figure it out what those innovations are going to mean for the business and for the patients. And then the third element is we're in a storytelling business to our patients, to our stakeholders. So ability to tell a story, emphasize the key points, and then get people mobilized to do the right things in the right direction is what's been at least my driving force in my career journey so far.
Excellent. Excellent. And Walid, you've also been on quite a journey. You started off in computer science, did an extensive amount of IT and business intelligence consulting, and then you make the hop into one of the world's largest automotive companies, serving as this big data officer, and then obviously one of the larger pharma companies in the world. Tell us a little bit about yourself too.
Sure thing. So I'm still on a mission to solve data and AI, whatever that means, essentially for corporations. And my background is, and this is one thing that Emre and I have in common also, I was born in Egypt and I grew up in Germany with a lot of different stations nation-wise, but also then topic-wise. And my passion was always technology. So I was always curious to see, but not only technology for the sake of the technology, but essentially to leverage technology for good. And how can I translate it into the world? So when I was in university, I did nearly every entry-level technology job. Like I was a system administrator, network administrator, database administrator, programmer, web designer, trainer. So in essence, when finishing university, I was like, I can't go into an IT department. That's simply not possible. This is essentially how I ended up in consulting for pretty well, because there was always this high dynamic of getting to understand the economy, understanding different businesses, in different industries, and really growing your not only the technological muscle, but also essentially how to implement and leverage it for the specific industry. And automotive is amazing, and Mercedes-Benz is an amazing brand, and I still drive a Mercedes-Benz to the day. But honestly, the sensor data and the autonomous driving, I got a bit sick and tired of it at a certain time. So in essence, Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany was a perfect fit for me at the time 2 years ago, because it is so diverse as a business. So Emre is here representing our healthcare business, which is a classic pharma business. But we also have our life sciences business, which is B2B in contract manufacturing and commercial. And we've got our electronics business,
Yep.
which is also a supplier. So you see the diversity of the company equal my curiosity when I was in consulting. So I was not focused on one singular technology, one singular market, one singular business model, but essentially I could replicate a bit of the broadness of the topics that we have. So this is the essence also of my role, to be able to support, enable all our different businesses and our enabling functions when it comes to data, when it comes to technologies, and when it comes to things like artificial intelligence.
Excellent. Emre, you started, as I mentioned in the bio, doing some extensive consulting about 15 years ago. You were working in biopharma companies, med tech. You worked in global health with organizations like Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. We'll get into the theme per Merck of as I said, this sort of the building this architecture around the drug that you're currently doing. But talk a little bit about sort of what you've witnessed the last 15 years or so in the digitalization of the healthcare space, and how things have sort of evolved as you have been in these increasing roles of, well, unique roles, as well as increasing responsibility along the way.
Yeah, I think the key point here is not to think about digitalization or digital health with capital D, but a lowercase d. I think there's been a lot of thinking here around the unified theory of digitalization or the digital health. And what I witnessed is over the last 10 plus years is, while we see the future, the way we're going to get there is going to have a lot of roundabouts, left and rights, and is going to be the hard work around that. And there are usually two dimensions that I think that affect how an organization, or let's say in this case a biopharma company, could approach digitalization topics. One is, especially in the biopharma business, we're dealing with a mixture of global and local way of thinking. I mean, our drug development in itself is a global process. And when it comes to our market access and the sales, it's an extremely local business. And I think that's usually one of the underemphasized points in the digitalization discussion in the healthcare, is that we assume it's one global industry, whereas we know it is extremely local, conservative, and complex to be able to do that. So that's, I think, one point that's important to keep in mind. And then the second is linking a digitalization journey of an organization with its ultimate mission and its competitive advantage positioning. So if you are a specialty innovator in the biopharma world, your ability to come up with drug discovery and quickness for the launch is going to be the bread and butter of what you do. Hence, the digitalization emphasis on there has been key. Likewise, if we go to the branded generics industry, I mean, there you are dealing with operational excellence in many cases. So getting your supply chain and the manufacturing done in the right way through the new digital tools has been key. So I think these are the 2 points that I just want to emphasize that drive a lot of what I observed in the industry. And if we step back, right, I mean, part of also explaining this journey in a storyline, I think we are right now in a unique stage. And let me explain. So I think about 10 years ago, what has happened was the hype around digitalization. This thing is coming, it's going to make a big change. And I think in many cases, we've seen a lot of CEOs embracing this agenda very quickly and, for example, appointing chief digital officers, right, to steer the agenda from the top down. And then we quickly realize that I think the promise of the digital is a long journey, and that ability to steer the ship from the top is necessary, but is not sufficient. Then I've observed the second stage, which I think came through the crash of this hype, that I think people realize this is going to be a lot of internal hard work, external change management is going to be required. So I think we went through a stage of reckoning where people piloted things, tried to experiment it, especially at the bottom-up levels. And now many of those things haven't really scaled up. And I think we are now in a third stage, which is the balancing act, right? We've figured it out. The top-down approaches do not always work. The bottom-up approaches have certain limitations. So we are, I think, in a better state to understand what are these things, how could they help us, and how could they go and enable us to find that incremental value in what we're trying to accomplish to it. So I think this is a good stage to be, because then we can really embed digitalization and the digital in how pharma thinks, acts, and delivers. And I expect this stage to, again, I think to take us to bigger and better places. Of course, later in the conversation, we could come on to some really disruptive, such as ChatGPT type of innovations. I expect those points to help us accelerate the current path where we're on. And it took us a while to get there, but I think we are now in a good place to drive this agenda further.
If I may add, Emre,
Sure.
and this totally resonates also with my experience. And I remember one conversation I had with our CEO, with Belen, very early on when I joined the company. She asked me what my dream is for digital, for data at Merck. And I told her, honestly, my dream is that you don't need me anymore. Because, and the idea behind this is essentially that data and digital is such a key muscle of the organization that it doesn't need transformative leaders like Emre and myself in the organization anymore, because everybody is, to a certain degree, has the foundational literacy, has the savviness, has essentially the business acumen to combine the potential of data and digital with the needs of the business, with the needs of the customers and the patients. And this is, I believe, one of the things that we've been missing in the past. There was a divide between the tech people, who essentially were maybe also oversold or overhyped and overpromised, and essentially the business that was successful already for decades. So in essence, for me, the biggest challenge is to bring together best of both worlds, and ideally bring the digital into the business and the business into the digital, so that it becomes one and not separate or isolated. So I see my role more as an orchestrator, as an integrator, as a catalyst to a certain degree for that change in terms of the people's mindset, the people's skill set, the ways of working in the organization, and of course also technology. But technology is not the one thing leading the discussion, but it's essentially to a certain degree trailing, and we bring it in when at the right time, when we know what we can, how it can benefit our patients and customers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you allow me to build on what Walid is saying,
Sure.
Especially leadership, right? Mission-driven leadership has become a key component in the data digital agenda for exactly the reasons Walid is elaborating. I think in the first generation of digitalization agenda, we've seen a lot of visionary thinkers showing the dot in the future, describing what it's going to enable us to do, but they didn't necessarily get into the architecture dimension of how do we get there. And as I think we learn on the digitalization that architecture thinking is critical on top of the vision element. And then in the later stages, when it comes to the micro level behaviors, processes that need to change for us to embrace this agenda and seize the benefits for our patients and the business, the catalyst and the coaching dimension has become quite element. So in a way, we had done from quite a big picture visionary thinking, and now we're working our way to the all individual level actions about what is that we could do things differently. How do we coach each other to embrace this agenda faster and bigger to get to what the vision dictates in the first place?
And one just brief little point I want to ask about, and then we'll get into the digital health business. But I was watching or listening to a previous show, Walid, that you were doing, and you were talking sort of about the history about how one of the important parts of your role over the years has sort of been convincing companies that this stuff that we call data is not trash. It's not to be put over here. It's an important part of this. Where are you in that evolution? I mean, are we through that now? I mean, I know that was in this particular interview, you were like, yeah, this was a problem for us back in the day, but say a couple words about that, if you would.
Well, I wouldn't say that we as an industry or we as a community have already solved it. So, but what's interesting to see, so 10 years ago, you might remember, data scientist was the sexiest job of the decade, essentially. Yeah. And I think there are some people who claim themselves to be recovering data scientists and now went into data engineering because they essentially seen that a lot of the let's say the heavy lifting is still done in the data piece, where you have a lot of data quality issues. We still have essentially a need to harmonize. So in essence, we've made good headway in the last years. So first of all, the awareness is there that data is an asset and that it is not a byproduct. And I think if I remember correctly in that talk, I said data isn't sometimes not even seen as an asset or as a byproduct. It's seen as a waste product, and it comes exactly with that quality. And in the meantime, we have at least that common understanding that it is something valuable, something important for the organization. But this is still something what we're still lacking at scale across the organization is the awareness and the muscle to really ensure quality of data at the source. Mm-hmm. We have a very delicate systems essentially that can that allow to do this is, let's say, upstream, but downstream, and where the data quality issues start. This is still something we are, let's say, working our way back to get there to do that. But in essence, I believe what's much better is the awareness. What's much better is also, let's say, single champions in teams that advocate for this, that essentially understand data quality. What's better in the meantime is that we have monitoring in place. So we have transparency about issues in the quality, and there is a starting, I would say, momentum, at least in our organization, to join forces and really have some kind of movement to ensure that we have it. Because also with the advent of things like ChatGPT, we use this also to repeat and reiterate on the message again and again and again, essentially that quality AI meets quality data. And it's still the old adage is garbage in, garbage out. Right. Quality in, quality out. So you want quality because you want the newest, fanciest tool. Then we also need to sit down and talk about gas, water, electricity, data, the foundational stuff. If you want to have it on tap and in high quality, we must make sure that the system that is in the background works well.
Okay, let's head over to Merck Digital Health, because when you go to, and everyone can go to the Merck website and check out some of this, but in general, there's a mission that says, look, we have the need to measure, to monitor various health conditions, chronic diseases. You're building this architecture, as you say, around the drug involving these two other Ds of devices and diagnostics. And then there's quite a long list of examples, and Emre, please give us the examples that you wish. If there's confidential ones there that you're still, can't, that's fine. But Merck KGaA is a neurology company. You have interesting projects going on in MS. You are a fertility company. Very interesting things happening in sort of how these digital tools can help people undergoing in vitro fertilization. Walk us through a little bit of the Merck Digital Health organization, sort of a little bit of the day-to-day and some of the priorities that you're working on currently.
Yeah, I think each company has its own way of defining digital health in line with, of course, their portfolio and their emphasis. So at Merck KGaA, we have an infectious, I must say, a mission, which is around helping create, improve, and prolong lives. And we play across multiple therapeutic areas, as you said, from neurology to fertility to cardiometabolic conditions to oncology. And what underpins our agenda in this digital health around the drug is how can we think more end-to-end about the patient journey and the value we create for our patients and the partners in this broader health ecosystem we're discussing. So let me make it a bit more concrete before I give to the example. So what we're looking here is, as you know, I mean, pharma has done a brilliant job in mastering the human biology and still has a big way to keep doing that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when it comes to reaching the patients, working with them in the right way, we are talking about what happens around the molecule. So that could mean the devices we use for the drug administration and enabling better adherence and persistence. For example, we're talking about ever more changing the point of care to where the patients have to be and want to be. So here we're talking about, let's say, home diagnostics elements. Here we're also talking about enabling the patient and the healthcare practitioners to better own the patient journey here. And that comes down to clinically relevant decision tools, the algorithms that we would like to do more of to enable the HCP and the patient on their journey. So those are the type of technologies where we're talking about when we talk about digital health. And I think there are two parts where this becomes extremely useful. One is we know, I mean, historically, biopharma has come in at the point of the treatment with definitely sufficient but not necessary way of improving the health outcomes. So through the digital health thinking, what we're doing is ever more patient-directed solutions. And starting that journey from the element of the prevention through the screening, treatment, and then ideally the monitoring after the end of the treatment part of it. So I think our ability to think is becoming a lot more holistic and end-to-end and be driven by the patient and the experiences they through in local healthcare systems to make the difference. And the second point is where this leads to in the big picture is in many contexts today, we are looking at financially strained or unsustainable healthcare systems. Ira, I presume you're based in the US. I mean, it's an archetypal example of inflating healthcare costs while the total health outcomes tend to stagnate. And as I think it's the healthcare industry, the opportunity is going to be how do we ever increase the health outcomes while retaining the same amount of resources or perhaps less to reach those elements. So what I think around the drug agenda, digital health agenda, broadly speaking, is helping us create the right data, the real world evidence, which helps us to navigate basically and educate what works and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. And create that visibility across the healthcare system players. And then here we're talking about one of those industry where a patient is in the hand of a practitioner on the right things to do. And at the same time, the payment structure for it is gone through a third party of a payer, let it be the government out of pocket or a private insurance. So I think the digital health for biopharma, medtech, so what is giving us that consensus, a common language to be able to bring our innovations to the right problems at the right time, at the right scale, basically to help some of the societal large big picture questions as well.
And Walid, so I mean, you have, as you mentioned, the responsibility to support, broadly the Merck data organizations across pharma, life sciences, and the electronics business. But thinking a little bit about, some of the projects that Emre has in his portfolio, whether it has to do with, the data captured from multiple, mobile sensor, hormone and body temperatures from people undergoing IVF, massive flood of data coming in. Talk about the data group's responsibility here, because clearly it's not just, you're not just gathering this stuff up, but you're helping everyone put it all to practical use. To take us through the data organization, if you would.
Sure. So that's the beauty of it. So it is obviously not a singular or a trivial problem. So essentially, we always try to approach it from 3 different angles. We like to start with the people dimension. So essentially, the right mindset, the right skill set. So my organization invests a lot into data culture, into upskilling, into the change management that is necessary for people to have the right approach and have the right open mindset to really leverage data and also be able to leverage data, but also to support essentially data stewards or data owners to have the right angle to the topics. That is one thing that we essentially do for all of the organization. A second piece, when it comes to our operating model and our defaults, is essentially that we collaborate with all the teams on the ground, on the data side, on the business side, on the IT side, and we orchestrate our efforts across the board so that in essence we have a clear operating model to ensure that Emre, for example, as a practitioner, as someone who has a P&L, who has a business, doesn't have to go to an outside market or doesn't have to essentially navigate the organization to find out where to get services, where to get skills, for example. And last but not least, on the technology side, we are supplying what we like to call the ecosystem of technologies. So we try to move beyond single platforms. So we integrate multiple technologies and we bundle them under a joint label, what I like to call a brand promise. So we call it Optimize, which is with a U, and it is essentially a combination. It is let's say a powerful architecture powered by Palantir Foundry, Amazon Web Services, and Snowflake at the core, but we want it to be more than the parts of the sum, just as technology. So essentially, the value add that my team can bring is that those technologies are intelligently combined in a coherent architecture altogether, that they are secure, that they are compliant with company regulations, that they are checked, and that they are monitored also from our end. And this is essentially what we evolve and also improve every iteration. We use Scale Agile framework to deliver this. So every 3 months there is new functionality, new features available to the organization, latest, sometimes in between. And we extend beyond, let's say, the classic data storage, data warehousing, analytics piece. So we are also investing in things like, for example, ontologies and ontology management, so that we can define a semantic model of the organization step by step. Then we streamline our data architecture in terms of data storage, but also in terms of data pipelining. So essentially that not everybody has to go to an SAP system or a Salesforce system or a real world evidence data set from the outside to ingest it again and again, but that is centrally supplied in our internal data marketplace, essentially. And last but not least, We also try to streamline and evolve our end user experience when it comes to generating insights and consuming data. So starting to move beyond classic reporting, dashboarding, using generative AI more and more to be able to query data and not having to build a dashboard for every single question somebody has.
And just connecting to that for one moment, because I found it quite interesting that Merck KGaA has a sort of, usually we look at pharma companies' research priorities and, there's the portfolio and all the different therapeutic areas, but you have a sort of a basket here specifically focused on artificial intelligence and sort of, the importance of this and everything you do. Can you just say a few words about sort of the Merck KGaA AI philosophy per 2023?
Well, to be honest, I'm happy that we don't have a distinct philosophy only for AI, because I would like to see it, let's say, tightly integrated in two dimensions. One is obviously with the data dimension, the other one is with the business dimension. So we always try to bundle it up so that it's not, let's say, the shiny, fancy new thing that we look at isolated. Right. But ideally, we try to connect it on both ends of the story. On the one side, on what I like to call gas, water, electricity, the foundational data and analytics topics that we have since decades when we talk about business intelligence and the likes and big data. And on the other side, our core businesses across the board. So AI is, and we try to stay very pragmatic and very, very down to earth on this, because I strongly believe AI has tremendous potential, but so for good, but also tremendous potential for overspending or throwing money out of the window, and getting the balance right, balancing supply and demand. This is essentially what we're doing. And I'm glad that with all of the experience this organization and other organizations have made in the past, we have a very, very healthy balance in the meantime. And I hope that's true. That's for many large organizations where people say, I'm willing to invest, but before we do so, we need to talk about what is the business case. And most importantly for me is I need a business partner on the other side who has a P&L and that commits to those goals. Because early in my career, I one of the biggest challenges for me was what I used to call popcorn customers at the time. And that was for me essentially people who came to me and said, oh, great, big data, fancy new thing. Can we do a use case? And then we do something, and then we have a meeting where we present the results, and the people come in, bring their popcorn, and want to enjoy the show. And then I always said, no, wait a second, that's a total misunderstanding. Because if this works, the hard part of the business, the hard part of the hard change is only beginning, and that will be you. That will be your business processes. That will be your people that need to change the way they work, that change the way they develop drugs, change the way they sell the drug. So in essence, the heavy lifting is not essentially to identify the right technology, to bring it into the company, to get it to security and data privacy clearance. The hard part is essentially to build something that is really usable and moves the needle across the organization. And we need stuff like A/B testing for this. And this is from a mindset perspective, people let's say, have to get used to it. But for us, it is quite simple at Merck KGaA, because essentially I tell people, like, we have to approach it like a scientist. We need to do experiments. And if the experiment fails, it fails, because experiments fail all the time. But this doesn't mean that essentially that whatever we plan to do is not doable. It just means we haven't found the right formula yet. And this is, I believe, something very important to understand, that essentially there is no right or wrong, or let's say there is no silver bullet, but there is simply the need for very, let's say, incremental scientific approach to this, to go topic by topic, case by case, experiment by experiment, either learn or success. For me, essentially, there is no failure.
And Ira, if I build on it,
sure.
I think if we have this distinguishing feature at Merck KGaA right now, it is this balancing act that we are not after, we don't have the technology hammers and running around the organization looking for the nails, right? And I think that's been a historical pitfall that our industry has fallen into with that came about the hype. Oh, all these technologies, let me see where I can use them. And we know that's very much against the scientific methodology as well. Here, we are starting with needs and opportunities that our patients, our partners in the healthcare industry are facing, and then trying to see how can we bring the right digital technologies at the right time, in the right way, to be able to basically get that nail into the shape it needs to be in. And this is the hard journey, right? Many times we have those conversations with the technology companies. Of course, they're trying to push. They have the ideas. I mean, they get sometimes impatient with us. But at the same time, we know the end customer for us is not the internal organization. It is our patients and partners, and that required that hard journey to follow this nails looking for the right hammers approach.
Yeah, I say a couple more, and this can, you can ping pong on this one together, because, and we profiled on our show the Microsofts and the Samsungs and sort of the large organizations that are developing some of these tools, but there's a lot of small ones out there too now, just like there's thousands of small biotech companies that obviously knock on Merck KGaA's door all the time. Hey, I got this new drug. Hey, I got this new product over here. I had a friend in the venture capital industry that it was a couple of years ago, and he, I think by like April, had seen something like 200 business plans for AI and drug development alone. What's sort of how much time do both of you sort of devote respectively to the innovation acquisition process here, and how do you go about evaluating all these small players that are out there in the short period of time that we have in a day?
Want to go first? Yeah, sure. So, actually, this is honestly something I'm really passionate about, and I would say, so your question was going in the direction, how do you squeeze it into a busy day? For me, actually, this comes naturally to a certain degree, because I believe it is a sweet spot to a certain degree, because those small innovative companies, and not every one of them will be, let's say, the biggest star, but again and again, you have a bit of a gut feeling in an early stage, they are onto something, and then you can be part of that journey. So I was on the I was on the board of a startup called Immuta, when they did their Series B, and that was, I think they were an evaluation of something between 60 and 100 million. They are in the meantime a unicorn, and essentially being part of that journey, because at the time at Mercedes-Benz we invested in that. That is just a great example. And so this is maybe also part of my personal curiosity. When I see something that is not yet big, but that has a lot of promise, then I'm very personally interested and intrigued to essentially understand more and see how it evolves, and see what the right inflection point is, maybe also as an organization like ours, to start leveraging that technology or not. Another experiment. Have to find out.
And Ira, building on what you're saying is, I mean, I face the same question in every conference, right? You're there as pharma, and you're surrounded by a myriad of innovators coming with different approaches and so forth. And there's also sometimes the guidance that these technology needs to follow is starting their approach with, and not what they're doing, what the technology they're mastering, what is that puzzle, the need that they're going to address. So I think our approach here is, as we get our head around what along the patient journey, the opportunities and the needs are, and specific to our portfolio here, and the strategic ambitions we have, it is, I think, understand the key technologies we want to invest and doing the due diligence carefully about who do we want to partner up with. Because the industry, I think, is still in its transformation. It's full of dreamers and sometimes even crooks to be able to really get the technology mastery. And on that regard, I mean, for example, most of the digital health companies are still not in the cash positive stage.
Yeah.
So for us, that requires not only figuring out where we want, what kind of technology to sell, what problem for us, but at the same time getting into a strategic partnership with a couple of these companies. We know we could rely on them and have the joint interest for the business sides of it both. And I think that's probably where, again, from the digital health perspective, we will have to go through a consolidation of companies working on these topics for them to reach at a scale and for them add a bit more business robustness what they're trying to do. And another dimension on this is today, I mean, we're surrounded by this myriad of technology offerings, and they address usually one very concrete issue in one concrete place. And in the complexity of the healthcare systems we deal with, even if we improve one element, we may not be able to seize the benefits of it for the patients and the business, because so many other things need to also change. So I think as the digital health companies mature and grow, we will be looking for multiple solution providers that we partner with, rather than every time we have an issue, we try to go and work with a separate partner on that one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned the people that are, dreaming, and there's a bunch of dreamers out there, but let's dream, the three of us, for a little bit here as well, because clearly, digital health is hot, AI is hot, but there's a lot of other stuff coming as well. Everything from, digital twins, in silico clinical development. We broached this topic of the digital human equivalent on a past show. Emre, Walid, take some time. Just, what makes you dream still in terms of specifically the healthcare space and where potentially technologies will take us?
Okay, let me start. So when we dream really big, so I'm a big fan of data, obviously, because it's my passion. And whenever I have an opportunity, so I have a Whoop strap and I have an Apple Watch, so I'm collecting also, let's say, very, very, very small amount of data that we can get already today to understand essentially my biological reactions, my patterns, and so on. I believe this will become more and more. It will become more pervasive. It will become more invasive, better sensors in body, for example. So we're looking at the vagus nerve and things like these, which is also developments in our organization. I mean, obviously, in the first instance, we're looking at things like brain interfaces. In the first instance, we only will do in the invasive stuff if it really is medically necessary, because it is a certain risk still. But I believe over time, the amount of data that we have about the human body, about the human condition, will massively improve. So when you talk about digital twins of the human body and the genome and everything, so I think we will have a much, much better foundation in the future to build on. And combining this with the ability to essentially analyze, identify, generate insights, make recommendations. And I see this in the evolution, for example, in companion apps that we have already today. So not wanting advertising, but essentially, if I take my fitness strap, that essentially can tell me something like my heart rate variability every night. It can tell me, it has a diary to document what I've been doing in the day before, so that it can identify correlations with coffee, with alcohol, with the amount of sleep and things like these. Obviously, when we go forward, that data will be, let's say, more and more automated, will be made available more and more in an automated manner. And those correlations and those recommendations can become much, much better and much more specific, also including things like biomarkers, maybe even in the future. So I really believe that at the moment, we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, and we still just have very early, very crude tools to essentially to work with that data. So in the future, I believe the dream will be twofold. Number one is we will have much, much more data from sensors and also behaviors and habits, and we will have much better tools to identify essentially cause and effect, and therefore also be more preemptive and proactive in health. And this is one of the biggest promises for me in the healthcare business. And I know that it might be a bit contradictory to classic drug design, but actually not working on essentially healing sick people, but working on making people stay healthy and not becoming sick in the first instance. I believe this is something humanity would be interested in paying a premium for not even getting sick.
Yeah, the prevention piece is so critical, and I think digital has a huge role in sorting that out. Emre?
Exactly. I mean, before I talk about some of the dreaming technologies, I mean, what I want to emphasize here is the point that Walid made earlier is, how do we assess whether we move the needle or not? And I think that's the ultimate value conversation we're after. So what I look for is two elements is in these technologies, independent of the technology itself, is does it have a clinical validity for showing what it's supposed to do? And I think that's where biopharma has been done an excellent job, is imbuing the scientific thinking into the human progress. And I think for digital health, we should not give up that scientific rigor. And then the second one is does it show how it moves the needle in the healthcare systems? It could be better outcomes, it could be the better cost management, it could be creating more simplicity. So I think for any kind of technology, these are the two dimensions I'm looking for. And what excites me about the technologies, I think one is, I think we are generally in a good state on the connected devices, connected diagnostics elements. There's still a huge room for example, bioelectronics to get there. And this is something really we need to make more use of it. Not making the hospitals the point of care, but making every one of us the point of care. When it comes to it. And one also I think emphasized element to it is if we bring the point of care to where people are, we're going to be cutting carbon emissions from everything you see about the hospital management, clinic management, people driving to the hospital. So I see, let's make more of that. The second one is what it was referring to when it comes to patient engagement, patient adherence, patient persistence. We are sitting on tons of data. And we know the clinical treatments is only one part of the answer. And some of the tough chronic conditions we deal in, let's say neurology or diabetes, we know it's a lifestyle matter. It makes in many places more difference than the treatment itself. So how do we imbue these various different data and bring it to a personal level and going beyond the treatment on what the individual needs to do? And then the third point, and I think we started the journey only recently to this. We talk about personalized medicine quite a bit, but linking basically the genotype of patients to the specific mode of action the molecules would have for us to identify the right patient in the first place, manage their treatment in a personalized manner from the dosage calculation to the follow-ups, and equip the HCP to predict how things might happen before they do happen, right? In one of the puzzles we deal with the healthcare systems is once you started seeing the symptoms, it's sometimes late to be able to intervene. So going back to that element of prevention, prevent before it happens, and when you're in the treatment, stay ahead of the disease course. And I think that's the one where probably we're going to see a lot more scaled innovations with clinical validity over the next couple of years.
Excellent. You both mentioned early on in the discussion, you both independently brought up ChatGPT, and I'd be remiss if I'm sitting with the VP, Global Head of Digital Health, and a Senior Vice President and Group Data Officer at one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Can you both take a couple minutes and give me your top line thoughts on what this is all about? Obviously, the people going crazy about it on all fronts. I sit here and look at my social feeds, and some people think it's the greatest thing, other people think it's the end of the earth. But what's the ChatGPT thing all about in terms of health, and where do you see this taking us?
Walid, I know you're a big fan of the topic, so
I cannot avoid it in my line of business. So I have to be. So in essence, I believe as often the truth will be somewhere in between. Yeah, if it's the let's say more important than the iPhone, more important than electricity, more important than fire, we will find out. If it's the end of humanity, we also will find out. Again, I believe that truth and reality, especially ChatGPT-4 or ChatGPT now with the GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 model, is somewhere in between. It is impressive technology that is in many cases useful, and that has taken a lot of people by surprise because it is so good. Because we were always, all of us were used to crappy chatbots. And all of a sudden you have a chatbot that is not crappy, but actually is good. And that in many cases, in some cases, it still fails, but it was, I believe that revelation in terms of that was what caught people by surprise and essentially generated all this buzz in the industry. When we calm it down for a second, for me, it's important to, let's say, not overemphasize one side of the discussion, but really be pragmatic about it and see and understand where is it useful, how can we leverage it. And obviously, it is in the development space. I'm not talking drug development. I'm talking essentially code development. It is useful. It can improve coding productivity in products. We see that like GitHub Copilot. But also when it comes to generating text, documentation, improving existing text, improving. So essentially, it is extremely well poised to support productivity on a personal level. That is let's say the first stage where I see a relevant and significant potential. But what I'm really even more curious about is, how would that evolve? How would that be integrated into processes? How would that be integrated into other pieces of software? Like, for example, Microsoft has shown with Microsoft Copilot 365. That will be very interesting to see. Let's say how the world look like if I have my personal assistants in every Zoom and every Teams meeting. If I have a recommendation for every email I can send out, if I can have a summary of every meeting I had, if I can ask, oh my God, did I have a task from the last meeting before I go into a meeting? So those are all the personal productivity gains that I strongly believe in. We will see more and more, and that will not mean the end of humanity. Most definitely not. So those are two different parts of the equation. When it comes to us at Merck KGaA, I believe also the global head of digital health and the group data officer will not be in an ivory tower to solve all the problems of the organization and find out. So our strategy is essentially to expose as many of our colleagues in a safe and compliant environment to that technology as early on. And this is what we're currently preparing for the next quarter, that they can essentially try things out. Because of all of our 64,000 employees, not everyone will have a brilliant idea. but a few will have, and they will come back to us and they will say, can I have X, Y, that? And we will give them X, Y, that, and that will move the needle eventually. So essentially, again, we're getting back to the literacy, we're getting back to this exposure of at scale of the organization to data and digital in a useful manner that will really make a difference. So where will this journey end? I will not be able to tell you, but we will find out collectively by doing a lot of small and big experiments and exposing our people to those technologies, but most importantly, in a controlled environment where it doesn't blow up our business and doesn't expose and risk our data.
And I completely agree with Walid on that inefficiency productivity point, right? Especially for our internal organization, the way we deal with our partners. I think it's going to be making us leaner and faster. Many domains. I don't want to dwell on the particular examples, but I have another point of really promise and potential, and a word of caution is democratization. Right. For a number of us that have been in this digitalization, the digital journey is, we've always faced that element of, oh, we gotta explain the digital in the right way. We gotta have our people embrace that change journey. And I think this is a major push in that direction, that I've seen a lot of our colleagues really experimenting it, embracing it, thinking about how they're going to be doing their job better by leveraging that. I think that's a huge, huge potential. And also, if we get it in the healthcare systems right, we can leapfrog some of the historical issues we deal with, such as access to the right information. Where I am still cautious of it is, I see the conversation, in sometimes very radical terms, man versus machine type of conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think it is missing the right way, I think, to navigate on the right answers. And that is going to be not an either or, but both an and. So how do we blend the right ChatGPT enabled information technologies, that it be on the prediction or the prescription capabilities, with the people and the agenda they're going to be driving it? Especially where I am is on the patient and the healthcare practitioner facing side of it. I mean, the underlying principle of our industry is medicine, and that is built on don't harm principle. So I think that's the one where we gotta be very careful, because it might take one bad experience to spoil the fantastic 100 great examples to be able to do that. I know maybe my answer is a bit on the caution and the conservative side of things, but I see this as a major stepping stone to jumping into that dream of the digital enabled healthcare world. And I think the stakes are too high not to grab this opportunity in the right way.
And if I may add, and this is one of the biggest risks that I see as well, it's over-reliance on the technologies. That is the number one risk. And then and the second biggest risk is that people are, let's say, too critical. We should take these technologies essentially at what they are and where they are good at. And we should accept and say 80% is better than 0%. Mm-hmm. And not essentially say, oh, you cannot give me 100%, then I'm not going to use it. Right. But I mean, and this is why I believe this augmented intelligence, this man-machine combination is exactly the success pattern that we need to establish. And most importantly, we must make sure that our colleagues, that our practitioners, that our patients understand they are still in the driver's seat and they are still accountable for the outcome. Technology is just a supporter, and technology is just a relief, but it is not taking off, let's say, it is not getting you out of the responsibility to stay a critical thinker and also an accountable actor.
Sure. I mean, that element there of accountability is key here, right? And again, in the field of medicine, I mean, we talk a lot about that moral responsibility of the advice, the guidance, and the actions. I think with the ChatGPT, we're going to get causal responsibility if something went back, but not moral responsibility, because again, as things look today, the ChatGPT lacks that agency of making a judgment in the right way. So great potential, the promise is there, and I think it's going to be coming down to key stakeholders in the healthcare industry, how we really get the scaled in the right way.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating future. But yeah, I mean, again, I'm sitting here and I'm looking and thinking about this Merck KGaA vision and mission, and sort of you break it down as science is a force for good, a way to drive human progress, and ultimately, as you were saying, both saying, making a very positive difference in millions of patients' lives. And I think you both encapsulate that 100%. And it's just been a really fascinating discussion in bringing all these themes together to see where we are in 2023. So I really appreciate both of you for taking the time to walk us through all these topics. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Emre Ozcan, Vice President, Global Head of Digital Health, and Walid Mehanna, Senior Vice President, Group Data Officer, Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. Emre, Walid, again, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come educate us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there for patients. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create the better tomorrow that's coming via what you both do. Really, really great stories.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think our mission that's unite us, and I think on the world of digital, we're on the same mission.
Great having both of you.
Great.